Hi, in this video series, we're going to have a look at SXA search. We're going to look at it from an architectural perspective, how it works from the inside, as well as how we can extend it to maybe create different filters or new filters within the search platform. Let's get started. So the first thing you need to understand is that SXA search is built on Backbone. Backbone.js is a model view JS framework that really provides you with the following components: events, models, collections, views, routers. And you really need to understand Backbone really well in order to be able to ultimately play around with and change and update and extend the search framework. There's a really nice video tutorial by Mosh Hamdani on Backbone.js. It's available on YouTube, or part of it is available on YouTube, and the full course is actually available on Udemy. So I definitely recommend checking it out or checking out any other Backbone training if you really want to delve into SXA search. Now, if we go back and start talking about search, as we said, is based on JavaScript, and hence you have a JavaScript file for almost every single component within the search components. So you have the search box, the load more, page selector, page size, variant, filter, all the filters, the results, all these things have their own JavaScript files. You also have some core files like the location service, the Ajax, the base model and base view, which of course extend the actual Backbone base model and base view, the search parameters, query, router, service, URL, and the component search itself. Now, how does it actually work? So as soon as we open up a page, let's say this page, which has, as you can see, a drop-down filter as well as a search result here, what happens? So the first thing is the actual search results gets loaded. So the data is retrieved from the server and displayed. Now, if we start filtering here, so I'll just filter it by a specific date range. As you can see, the data is filtered without actually any going back to the server or any refresh. It's all done through the hash. So again, let me just filter out. As you can see here, what's happening is a hash date facet is added here that is used for the filtering. Again, this is using the Backbone.js framework. Now, to get started, so the first thing that actually happens is the component search result.js starts actually taking action. So component search results, if we open it, I'll just open it with Visual Studio Code so that you guys can see it better. You can see that this file has a couple of things. First, it has a collection of search result views, a collection of search result models, URL helper model, query model, API model, and it initializes the initialized with false. Then you have the actual search result model. That's the model for our search result. And it has a set of things. First thing, it has defaults. Defaults are default values that are defined for specific models within Backbone. So as you can see, you have here something called template, something called template items. Template is ultimately how the render function is going to render the data that comes back. So if we look at this here, you see it's a UL class search result list, and then for each result, there is an LI. Let's look back into our code and select here. As you can see, here's the UL we're talking about and the LI. So again, all this is rendered from this code. I would have, of course, preferred that this is read from a rendering variant, so it gives us more flexibility on how the items are rendered. Maybe we want to create it as a card list or something else other than UL and LI, but I guess that's how it's done now. And then, as you can see here, for each template item, it just goes in and loops through the LIs, and if it's a POI data, it shows the data longitude and data latitude. And then we have the initialize function, which actually initializes the search results component. And as you can see here, what it does is it takes the hash object, so it reads from window.location.hash, so that's the filter here. Let me just show you. It's reading this part, and it's reading the signature in case we do have defined signature, and then it's actually venting on the result loaded and result loading functions once the actual data is loaded. And this is going to be loaded through the router. So the component search router is actually going to get the data and push it back. Okay, we have the view here. So again, we've talked about the model at the start, and then we have the view here. And the view has also an initialize function that ultimately gets the data from the element.data and then puts the no result text just in case there is no results, and then it actually starts adding the variant classes and the load more if eventing on load more in case there is a load more function, so that when you click on load more it starts actually loading, and then it actually calls the render function, which, as you might have guessed it, what it does is actually takes the element HTML and then puts the template result through the function template. Function template is a backbone function that enables you to take the data, which is the results here, and give it ultimately to the template that we've seen in the model at the top here, the default template here, so that it renders it with that structure. So you don't have to do the HTML parsing ultimately. Okay, but the very first function that actually gets called is the API.init, which initializes the API, which is, as you may remember, was this collection that has the search result views, the search result models, and so on and so forth. So what this does is the initialize actually creates the URL helper model, the query model, the API model, which are, again, if you remember from the start, were JavaScript functions here, or were JavaScript files here. So you can see each one of these very easily. So you have the search URL here, which is being initialized there. You have the query model, here it is. And you have the API model, which is the search Ajax, which is this one. So the naming is really easy to understand and really easy to really track it and trace it. Then you have the search results, which is a variable called search result, which retrieves the dot search results. And as you can see, that's actually the parent of the search result. So here the div at the top has the word search result. So if you're cloning this component, or if you're cloning the search result for any reason, just make sure that the search result is there so that the data is able to be retrieved. And then the result model is a new search result model, and we start pushing it, and same thing, we push the search result view into the collection. So you can see the collections that we started in the API here, these two, they have the search result model and the search result view pushed into them, with, of course, the view associated with the result model we just created here. And then, of course, we actually set them in the API.search result views and API.search result models. Now, that's all good. That's the first step that actually happens. So it's the API init, and then the initialize, of course, occurs. So initializing the model, initializing the view, because we've instantiated them. And then the router actually gets starts taking over. So the router, what this does is it starts retrieving the data through the get data model here. So if we just go back one step, so the first thing we said is API init gets called, then init search result model and search result view, which in turn will go into the get data function because it's extending the router. So as you can see here, the router, the first thing that gets called, of course, is the API init for it, which says backbone.history.start, which will in turn start initiating backbone router and backbone history. And this will call the check URL, which ultimately calls xa.component.search.service.getData. So if we go to the search service, we'll find the function getData, here it is, which invokes something called getSearchResultsData, which again parses the windows.location.hash, that's this part here, and then for each search result model starts getting the data for it or starts retrieving the information for it. Now, getting the data itself is through this. It's the getData API model.getData, which is a callback function, which has a callback function which invokes the result loaded. API model.getData is actually going to go to the server to get the data itself. So, as we said, it's getData from our router, invokes the getData from search service, which will call the server. So what it does actually is it calls a URL very similar to this URL here. So it calls a URL like this, which I'm going to show you what it does. So we're just going to put it here. Hopefully the data still works. I'm not sure if it's the same environment. It seems like it. Okay. And this actually returns, as you can see, my result data that's being displayed there. So it shows me here a JSON object which has total time, count time, query time, signature, and so on, and then the results, which is the most important part here, which gives me the result data that should be displayed. And if you actually look at the result data here, let me just open it in something a bit more readable. Okay. You can see here that the results here has ID, language, path, URL, name, and HTML. HTML is actually the HTML that's coming from the rendering variant. So when you define a rendering variant for search results, so if I go back here, rendering variants, search results, this rendering variant is actually what's being displayed within that HTML, or what's being rendered within that HTML. This one. So div class field title, as you can see, it is the same thing we have here. And when you change that, again, it will change the results that are coming here. Now, when the API model actually invokes this, it's retrieving this JSON object so that it can start parsing it. And for you to understand what this actually does is it calls the action results in the search controller. You can check it out, of course, through any disassembly item. And then here you can see that it's invoking the URL. So it's my site URL /SXA /search/results. And then it has a set of parameters: scope, the item ID, which is the current page, the signature if it has, auto-fire search, the variant it's using, and the page size. So you can see all these items are being put here. And this is ultimately what gets this result that again gets handled from the API model back to the render function that we talked about. So what does the action results do? So we understood now that the data is going to come from Sitecore.xa.feature.search, which is our controller that's being invoked here. But what does this do? It uses the search service to get .getQuery function with the search query model to generate the query. Then it invokes getItems method. If sorting direction is random, then it just gets random items. I don't recommend to use that because I see it implemented in a really slow way. Else uses the source service to sort the query and select items from the query. Then it gets the variant and select a result item with variant and item as attributes. So this is generating the data that we're going to see here, or the JSON data we're seeing here. The result item has the following attributes. As we've seen, it's ID, language, path, URL, and HTML. which invokes the render variant function in the variance abstractions variant render to get the HTML of the rendering variant. Again, like we said, this is why anything within that HTML is actually coming from the rendering variant. Okay, now once this data is retrieved, as we said, what happens is this template that's being defined in the search result model is actually what's being used. So the render function, let's go back to it here. The render function here, what it does, as we said, as we've seen, it gets the template from the model, and then from the results that came back from the API model and the no result text are instantiated as the template result, and then we put the template result, which will automatically show either no results text if results is empty, or it will actually show the data rendered using the template we've seen at the top here. So this is the first thing to understand. It's really important to understand and know how Backbone is working to handle all these requests, because in future videos we're going to talk about firstly understanding how the filters work. So what happens when I actually start filtering here and how that works, and then we're going to look at how to actually extend it and create our own filters. So what we're planning to do is create like a filter cloud that enables you to filter using specified items in that filter cloud. Thank you for watching.